Hello, and welcome back to another episode of Hot Topics. I'm Lauren Serrato, our social media and media relations coordinator. Today, our topic is water, and we are going to focus on the city perspective. Now, as Arizonans, we are no stranger to the major national headlines, Arizona out of water. Now, I gathered today the perfect panel to debunk that, to educate you all that on the contrary, we are not out of water. In fact, our water is safe now and in the future. Now, I think in this next hour and moving forward, it is so important to get that narrative, get that headline correct, not just for our residents today, but for our residents thinking of coming to Arizona. From a business perspective, the major corporations, small businesses, they want to have that assurance that their water is safe and that making Arizona their home, the West Valley, this entire region, is the smart decision. Now, I'm excited to introduce our panel today to, like I said, educate us on the state of water from the city's perspective. I'm going to start with Cynthia, if you can introduce yourself, please.
Sure. Thanks, Lauren. Thanks for WESTMARC for inviting me. My name is Cynthia Campbell. I'm the Water Resource Management Advisor for the City of Phoenix.
Good afternoon. I'm Mike Boulay. I'm the Director of the Water Resource Management Department for the City of Surprise.
Thanks, Lauren. Terry Lowe, Water Resource Director for the City of Buckeye.
Perfect, thank you. Now let's jump into it. Terry, I want to begin with you. We talk about the major headlines, like I mentioned. Now, Buckeye is, again, no stranger to those headlines, being deemed one of the fastest growing cities in the nation. So that's huge. How does water management play a role in that growth?
Well, obviously, everything starts with water. Without it, we wouldn't have a city. We wouldn't have anything to start the community itself. So water management is key to ensuring that we have the lifeblood for the community.
Perfect, thank you. Now, Michael, again, we talk about growth, and Surprise is no stranger to that either. 150,000 residents is what they surpassed this year. So similar question, how are you able to manage the water development and again, create projects that are providing water now and for the future?
A great question. So, the key for us as utilities and for cities is to ensure that we're looking out 5, 10, 15 years ahead, whether that's through certificates of assured water supply or designations of assured water supply. But we have a commitment to our current, committed, and planned customers that we have the resources available over the planning horizon for the designation, but on into 100 years as well. So throughout the development review process, my team was really focused, and their teams were really focused on ensuring what's best for the city.
Perfect, thank you. Cynthia, I turn to you. Same question. We talk about growth. Phoenix is again making those national headlines as one of the fastest growing major cities in the nation. What are the projects that you have in the works and in the future that will supply water for your residents?
So, Lauren, what we've been trying to do over the past couple of years is that, we have worked for over 100 years in Phoenix to develop a water portfolio that's large, that's sustainable, that's robust and diverse. And that diversity in the portfolio, having a number of different sources, is what we're really leaning into right now. So what we've been doing is putting together infrastructure projects to make sure that if we lose access to some of our supplies, say, for example, the Colorado River supplies, that we have the ability to move our other supplies that we've accumulated to the places where they need to be. So the city invested over $300 million in a drought pipeline to move water to the north side of the city from the south. And then we're also looking at very seriously at advanced water purification at our 91st Avenue wastewater treatment plant to basically turn a resource that was largely untapped as drinking water into drinking water, which would be a game changer for us.
As a follow-up to that, we mentioned economic development and essentially setting these businesses up for success coming here to Arizona. So we want these high-tech businesses coming to Phoenix, coming to Surprise and Buckeye and all throughout the region. But for those that are not experts, explain to me, how do they get that water?
Well, when we take on new businesses, new industries, whether it's in Phoenix or Buckeye or Surprise, we make commitments to these customers. We understand what they need. We ask them what they need. And then we make sure that we have the available resources to serve them. So for Phoenix, what that means is especially along the 303 corridor, where a lot of new high tech is coming in, we have had to look at very carefully our portfolio and making sure that we have not only access to the water, but that we're looking very proactively at the infrastructure that will be needed, that because it's largely an undeveloped area, to basically move large amounts of water and wastewater in and out of the area.
Now, Terry, I want to get into the Groundwater Management Act. Now, this was created 40 years ago. Now, like all the cities represented today and the entire state of Arizona, there is immense difference in what it looks like now as what it looked like 40 years ago. In regard to water management, what can you tell me about that change in that time span?
Well, really good question. I mean, for Buckeye, 40 years ago, the city of Buckeye had a few thousand people, primarily an agricultural area. And so the water that was being used for that agriculture was primarily coming from the ground. But since that time, obviously the city's grown up. Ag is still a very important part of our economy, but that ag is transitioning to other industries. And so the role of groundwater in the area turns to us and the responsibility to manage that groundwater as sustainably as possible. We're a groundwater sourced community. We're working on increasing our portfolio to grow our renewable supplies so that source of our water is groundwater, but we'll be importing additional waters, additional waters to offset that pumping as we transition that agriculture into industry. So we're pretty uniquely set up, Buckeye itself, in our position within the valley as it relates to our position along the I-10, along SR-85, where industry can grow and move and transport goods in and out. And so we need to make sure that our management of this resource is as sustainable as possible.
Interesting, thank you. Now, Cynthia, I want to ask you the similar question. Phoenix, driving through it even a decade ago, there's so many new buildings that you're seeing today, and being able to supply the water for all those residents that are in these buildings. What can you tell me about the difference between, let's say, 40 years ago to today?
Well, the advent of the Groundwater Management Act for Phoenix was really a game changer. It turned the city of Phoenix into a system that largely relied upon groundwater to a system that is almost entirely on renewable supplies. So right now in Phoenix, we use about 2% of groundwater to source our customers right now. That may increase, but we have the ability to increase that because we have a larger amount available to us. The beauty of it was also from a 40-year ago standpoint is that we had access to the then new Central Arizona project, and we built the first water treatment plant on the CAP. And it has been, CAP has been a great partner for us in allowing us to make that transition off of ground.
Michael, I want to follow up for cities that aren't as large as Phoenix or not as large as Buckeye. How does that apply to them in that 40-year time span? How have you seen change?
Yeah, good question. So very similar to Buckeye. We were primarily an agricultural city that, that was the basis of our economy. And as agriculture has retired, single-family homes have come in to sort of be the new crop. And traditionally, single-family homes use a lot less water. And during this ramp up, we knew that as we transition away from the ag lands and out into the northern parts of the city, where it's more desert, we're going to have to grow our portfolio. So in anticipation of this growth through general planning efforts and water master planning efforts, we've been trying to keep pace and getting back to that 5, 10, 15-year snapshot, to ensure that we have this runway for sustained and continued growth.
Perfect, thank you. Now this next one's a mouthful. I want to make sure I'm saying it right. The Arizona Department of Water Resources Water Report. Now, the report just came out, so that impacts cities throughout the region, throughout the state. Terry, how does that impact such a big city like Buckeye, and what have you seen now that's implemented?
Well, if you look long term, and if nothing were to change, obviously that's going to have an impact on all of our communities and our ability to sustain what we've got, as well as grow our economic importance to the valley. But right now, we're positioned where we're in a good position to continue our growth, to grow our economy, to attract more businesses. And during that time, we will be working towards, again, growing our portfolio, adjusting our management practices further, becoming more sustainable in how water gets used, increase our conservation efforts. And that will allow us to think, we think of beyond the first 10, as Michael mentioned, 5, 10, 15 years. We're thinking out 20 years, and then we're thinking out 40 years, and we're thinking out. And so the DWR's report and model is important. It gives us a snapshot of where we are, and if we do nothing, where we could be. But that's not.
And to touch on maybe the new updates on it, there seems to be a new stance on groundwater. Now, tell me, Michael, what does that mean for our designated water providers?
Sure. So it really depends on how the city or utility portfolio is formed. But for Surprise specifically, what we've demonstrated to the state to be our legally, physically, and continuously available source is groundwater. So as we grow into our designation volume, and we look to future designation updates, we now know that we may not utilize groundwater as that source or supply to increase that volume. The good news is our designation was updated last year, so we had 10 years of runway to help figure this out and shake out the legislation or policy that come of this. But yeah, like Terry mentioned, it's going to be focusing on renewables, localized water recharge and water recovery to ensure that we can stay ahead and on this runway to allow this growth to occur.
Perfect, thank you. Now, talking about, we have a new governor, and of course, at the beginning of her term, she announced the Water Policy Council. Now, of course, that affects the entire state, but from a city's perspective, Terry, how does that affect large cities like Buckeye?
Well, at the present time in council, the council is looking at, and I'll use the governor's words, it's looking at modernizing modernizing the Groundwater Management Act. And so it's a little unclear as to what the end result is going to be as of term of effect. I mean, Buckeye was not part of that. Unfortunately, we hope to be part of that committee, but right now we're watching and waiting and putting our input in where we can. And so it's really a little unclear as to how it might affect us, but we're hopeful. Again, it's been 40 years. And so there's some things have changed. I think 40 years ago, the valley was a lot of homes and a lot of agriculture. And now we've got TSMC in Phoenix that uses a lot of water, totally different approach to water management water use that wasn't even traditions of groundwater management.
Thank you. Now, out of that council came 2 committees. Now, Michael, can you tell me what are the purpose of these committees and what can we expect to see come from them?
Sure. So the Assured Water Supply Committee is really focused on, okay, ADWR has put out this groundwater model that's sort of in protection mode of the groundwater. And they're going to be looking at other policies and legislation that could also strengthen that as well. And as Terry mentioned, groundwater management code is over 40 years old, and there's quite a few loopholes that could not have been anticipated in the 80s. And so this committee is going to be looking at those loopholes specifically. And there was a great meeting held yesterday, and the dialogue and stakeholder input has been great thus far. So we're optimistic, but like Terry, we're anxious to get involved as well.
Perfect. We use words like optimistic and creating the correct narrative and trying to be positive about all things water. Now, of course, we know we're not naive that there are issues, there are problems to be addressed. We are a state that needs water. Water is so vital. And one of the ways to address that problem is infrastructure, like you mentioned, Cynthia. Can you explain what that would look like, what that is that infrastructure is able to do to create a solution?
So before I say that, I would like to point out something that is so obvious to all of us and probably all the people who are listening to this, and that is that Arizona has always been a hot, dry place. It bears saying though, because sometimes, especially in the national media, they seem to lose sight of that fact, and they seem to lose sight of the fact that the way we've approached water management in this state pretty much since there have been Western settlers here, has been to look at water as a finite resource, as something that needs to be closely managed, closely dependent upon, observed. And so all of the efforts that have occurred with the Groundwater Management Act, with the Governor's Water Council, with the infrastructure that I'm talking about, is all looking forward. We're not waiting until the point when we're, quote, out of water, because we're not out of water. But what we are doing is we're looking at it proactively ahead of time and saying, okay, now is a point in time in which we're seeing we have to pivot. And as Terry and Michael are telling you, their cities are ready to pivot. We're ready to pivot in Phoenix. And so to your question about the infrastructure, advanced water purification offers us one opportunity. It's not the only opportunity, and it's not the single opportunity, because there are no silver bullets, right? We're going to have to do all of the above when we look at the way we pivot. But for us, looking at turning a resource that we have in purified effluent, turning that back into drinking water, putting that back into our system, it's drought proof. It's a resource we currently have. It does not increase our groundwater pumping, and it does not increase our demand on our renewable supplies. Yet it offers us an opportunity to make better use of the water we already have. And so it's an expensive technology, no doubt about it, but it's a proven technology. And what we're looking forward to is really getting out there and talking to the public about what it means to have that purified water resource available to us. And we're hoping that perhaps we could be the example, not just for other cities in the Phoenix metro area, but throughout the state and throughout the West.
Perfect. And I can imagine collaboration would play a huge role as a tool to do so. You mentioned the things that you're saying here. What are the opportunities that you see in collaboration? Maybe not now, but in the future.
Well, specifically on advanced water purification, one of the things that really makes it desirable for us is that our 91st Avenue facility is located squarely within the West Valley. And it offers us the opportunity to offer collaboration with other West Valley cities, as well as East Valley cities, who already send water to that plant, to work with us on a more regional impact of this infrastructure. It doesn't just benefit Phoenix, it has the potential to benefit a number of different cities. So that I think is one way. I think the other primary way we need to look at collaboration is that for many cities, we all have different kinds of portfolios. I think you've heard here today the differences between Buckeye and Surprise and Phoenix and our portfolios. Sometimes it's not a function of having enough water in your portfolio. It's having the ability to get it where it needs to be. And there are a lot of opportunities, I think, that we've already started to explore, working together city to city to assist in that, working with our regional partners or wholesalers in CAP and the Salt River Project, getting them to assist us to use existing infrastructure to help move that water around the valley so we all have good access to our portfolios.
Gentlemen, I open the question to you as well. How do you see collaboration being a tool for Surprise or for Buckeye?
Yeah, so just simply the wheeling of the water and the connecting the dots on into the future, it is the future, right? Specifically speaking of the City of Phoenix Advanced Purification Project. They're doing an incredible job already partnering with the cities to understand, engage interest, and figure out ways to connect the dots. We're also affiliated with a consortium called the West Valley Water Association. And that group is focused on just answering that exact question. Okay, who has the water? Who has the canals and the weeds to get this from A to B? And then also, collective bargaining power, right? So we can work together on these large scale infrastructure projects, whatever it may be, with the political will or power of multiple cities. That's where I see us continuing to evolve.
I don't know if there's any more I can add to it per se, but it is the next step in meeting the demands of ways where each little city can act like its own independent business and have enough resources in order to meet those demands as we grow. And there are many cases you don't know. The cities are sort of melding together geographically. Across the street, you're in another city. The same thing has to happen with the infrastructure network for water. It's the next step that happened with agriculture. When SRP came about, it started Far East Valley and worked its way to Phoenix and beyond. And now it's going to work its way through the domestic side of things. So it's part of the evolution. As you grow bigger, you have to evolve and you have to collaborate with your partners, not just on the municipal side of things, but also in the business side of things. There's a lot of capital that's going to need to be had to build infrastructure, and businesses are the ones that are going to be able to help us help them in the future.
Excellent. Now, to the ladies and gentlemen in our audience virtually, I encourage you to ask questions in our chat. We'll be sure to get to those towards the end of our conversation today. Now, Michael, again, talking about the pros. We talk about the pros of being a designated water provider. And again, on the flip side of that, what could be the cons to that?
Sure. So I think one of the biggest cons is really the misperception of what a designation is. I think a lot of folks that see, oh, City of Surprise is designated water provider. That's kind of a magic wand, any development, any place, any amount of water for any duration. And that's really the contrary. Designations of assured water supply are very prescriptive. And it's really your best guess at a 10-year snapshot of where you are in time. So some of the cons associated with that for us is just sort of managing those expectations, helping to sort of guide and navigate new developments that weren't anticipated in a designation through the process. Meanwhile, the rules of ADWR are changing, and so we're adapting and absorbing that too. Also, a con of a designation, and when compared to a certificate of assured water supply, could be a certificate of assured water supply locks up all of the water, groundwater necessary for that development forever. A designation of assured water supply grows into it, and so we always have to make sure that we're able to meet those milestones on the 10 or 15-year horizon. So there's just a couple of them.
Okay. And aside from that water supply, what other challenges are these utilities facing?
So, much like every industry that's active right now there's a war on talent, specifically in the utility industry. Not many people go to college or high school and say, I'm going to be a wastewater operator when they grow up, although it's an incredible career. So, we're dealing with that, and then obviously the escalation. But there's other constraints pulling us as well. Like, we're all dealing with the changing water quality parameters, PFAS. That's another headline that's been sort of thrown around out there. The lead and copper rules are changing at the EPA, so we're all adapting to all of that too. So, that's kind of what's top of mind.
Now, I open this question to anyone that would like to answer. I think a misconception when we talk about water is that it's in a category in itself. Now, how does water really affect all things of quality of life, of residents, economic development, all these things that people may not associate water with? How does it do just that?
That's a deep one.
I think it's, it's so fundamental, as I think Terry pointed out, first comment right out of the box. We have to have water in the desert Southwest to make our lives sustainable. And that's not just, we have to have water that comes out of the tap to drink and to wash and things like that, but we have to have water to make the environment around us really livable in a way that's appealing from both a personal side as well as an economic impact side. Then on the economic impact side, there is water use associated with commercial industries, with industrial manufacturing industries, and we have to account for all of that. But I think what we've been able to do for many years in the Phoenix metro area is that the cities have worked tremendously hard and invested millions of dollars in making sure that their portfolios were as large and robust as they could be in order to accommodate growth. So for many years, people who would come in for growth never had to hear about water because frankly, we already had it set up in a way that it wasn't a question of whether it was there, it was how much do you need and where do you need it? And so we were able to answer those questions. We're at a point right now in our history where we're pivoting a little bit. It's a little more constrained than it may used to be even 5 years ago, but we've been through these before. We've been through periods of time in Arizona history where we've addressed constraints of water and we've had to, I don't want to say slow down, but we've had to be very careful and thoughtful about how we grew and how we looked at water. It's just another one of those times. And we hope that at some point in time, we will get back to the place where people don't have to have it quite right in front of them. At least we will always have it right in front of us as water managers. But I mean, people who don't have water as part of their daily concern in their business won't have to have it right out front. But for now, we're just looking at that pivot point. But I think it's a great opportunity to point out to industries that come to Arizona, as well as the national media, that this is something that we think about thoughtfully every single day. And you cannot say that about other economic markets in the United States and water. Nobody does it quite the way we do.
Well said, Cynthia. I want to turn to one of our questions here in the chat, open to anyone that wants to answer. What resource do we have with foreign entities that are using our groundwater?
That's an interesting, it's an interesting conversation because who uses groundwater is probably less important as to how you're using groundwater, right? Does it matter that it's a foreign national versus an American company? Because in the context of the conversations that have occurred about this topic, it's been focused on an agricultural use. And so I think as cities, we ask the question about, where is the highest and best use of available water, regardless of who's using it, and what provides the best economic impact to the state of Arizona. That's not to say it's mutually exclusive, it's either one or the other, but that really should be more of the conversation. So if we're using a finite resource to support production of agriculture that works its way outside of the state of Arizona, people get excited about that and say that's export. But frankly, if we have manufacturing that uses water and we export those products, that's also export. Perhaps the better way to frame the conversation is that if you have a limited amount of water that you're talking about, then maybe there has to be some discussion about which is the highest and best use. Or maybe there's ways to limit, so we are able to use it in a way that provides the best benefit to the state of Arizona.
Extremely well said. I think that this is speaking specifically to the groundwater pumping that's occurring on state land from the farming. That's an unregulated area outside of our current active management area. It really governs groundwater. And so, perhaps, this assured water supply group that has been formed, maybe it's time to start looking at these areas outside of the AMA, in an effort to sort of identify thresholds or regulations for just such abuse. But I want to really hit what you said about, we're exporting water every day in every industry. This is just sort of a headline grab piece because it invokes emotion. But it's up to us to ensure that, again, it's the highest and best use of what was planned for our property that was anticipated in our portfolio.
Do you have to comment on
No,
that, Terry?
nothing more like.
Perfect. Michael, I want to touch on something that you mentioned. You said a headline that brings emotion, whether that be fear or reading Arizona out of water. People that read that and have that fear in them, like, oh, maybe my water is not safe now, or maybe for my kids down the line will not be safe in the future. As a water manager, what would you address those to assume and to assure them that that is not the case?
Yeah, I think that we can sort of go through the educational process of what we do as a city, by the time you see mass grading equipment out there, the work that's gone into getting them to the place where they can do that has been oftentimes 10 years or so in preparation. But really, what I hope that these headlines begin to invoke is ownership in terms of the practices that folks are using at home. We talked a lot about big regional water supply projects, but we're heavily invested, all of us, in protecting the supply that we currently have. And I'm not talking about the antiquated meat and potatoes of education and outreach, which is very important, part of conservation, but this is generous turf reduction programs. This is smart water meters. This is really being on a first name basis with our largest water users and conserving what we have in an effort to sort of reduce what we have to go get, because water isn't getting any less expensive. So yeah, my takeaway from that question is just we need to have ownership in the problem.
Well said. I think another interesting fact that people probably don't even think about or even know is that the water that we're using now is less than what we were using decades ago. And that's with the population skyrocketing, let's say 40 years ago since the act was introduced. What does that say about the state of water and what it could look like in the future, knowing that the population is not slowing down anytime soon?
Start on.
Yeah,
I think
please.
it says a lot about the valley and about Arizona, and people migrate here from all over. I'm a transplant myself, and I think people grasp the concept that water is a valuable resource, and the fact that they habitually change on how they utilize it, and we're able to therefore meet those larger demands with the same amount of water is because we've all taken some ownership in it, even those the new people that come in, like myself, say, okay, how can I better utilize this drop of water? And then therefore looking to the future, there's going to be more available.
So yeah, it's interesting. You walk into ADWR's office in downtown Phoenix, that poster's right there on the wall as it relates to how much groundwater was pumped in the 50s and how much groundwater is pumped today. And what that shows is, homes are using less water than agriculture, but also we're being wiser with our water. So I think the takeaway is, the demand per capita is going down. There's a lot of reasons for that. But it also says that, hey, look, agriculture is an extremely essential function of our economy. Towns exist because of agriculture. Maybe there's things that we can be doing to use the water more efficiently to be saving in the cycle at large.
The one thing I would add to that is that in Phoenix, we basically exhausted the conversion of agriculture to households, to rooftops some time ago. And there's still pockets, but for the most part, as we've expanded, as we've grown pretty much in the last 23 years, that expansion to the extent hasn't been infill, and there's been quite a bit of infill, but it's been over raw desert. So for those who say that those conservation measures that Michael and Terry have pointed out, that we use less water is solely attributable to the conversion from agriculture to municipal, that's not true. In Phoenix, we are producing the same amount of water, and in most years, less water for our customers than we did 20 years ago. And we've added over 450,000 people to that. So that's not an agricultural conversion. That's people in their homes making decisions about how they live their life, what their outside environment looks like, and how they think about water. And that's what's so critical to sustainability in the valley, right? We don't want to think about conservation as something that we just do in an emergency. We don't want to be like Southern California, where they're constrained on how they use water, only to then ask their government, when do those constraints come off? We want to look at it more holistically and say, this is a way of life. This is not a temporary situation. We all need to use water efficiently.
I know prior to this, once we started the webinar, we were joking about the abbreviations that are really tricky to get, the terminology that for non-water experts like myself have trouble with. So for people like myself that are not a water expert, like you mentioned, being able to do things in your home, in your businesses that help the region, the state with water, what are some of those things that maybe the cities have available as resources?
I'll go. So obviously, you could reach out to a utility provider and there are a host of just free resources. And if you were to ask somebody from the utility, hey, can you come check something out, on my property, help me, like, they'll go. I'm speaking for Surprise, but I know that these two as well. We've stood up a water education center in Surprise that's dedicated to promoting xeriscape landscaping, right plant, right place. There's rebates for doing this stuff right, for smart irrigation controllers and for turf removal programs. In Surprise, 55% of our water is used outside. So that's water that we're not getting back to wastewater plants that we can't recharge. And so that's where our focus is with outreach and education. So I was born and raised here, and so like water conservation is kind of like a drone in my mind. And so that's why we're at this point where we kind of need to pivot and make it fresh and make it different, make it more relevant.
Yeah, I know the Phoenix website is filled with resources. Do you have anything in particular you want to point to?
Yeah, I would, Michael did a great job of pointing to the outside issues in terms of your landscaping, but also on the home level, what you pick for when you buy a dishwasher, when you buy a washing machine, oh my goodness, the differences are immense between a front loading washing machine and a top loading washing machine. And the amount of water you can save. Toilets. Most people don't think about upgrading their toilets. It's just something that's in their house. But if you've never upgraded your toilet and you've been in your house for more than 10 years, there are toilets that are much more water efficient probably than you have. And those are not enormous expensive things to do. And as Michael pointed out, a lot of cities have rebate programs for those, but those make an enormous difference in the amount of water. And that really is the driver that's been pushing the water use on the single family household level down, is as developers, home builders build new houses, they're putting in efficient appliances. They're putting in Energy Star and Water Sense rated appliances. And that's making a huge difference. But what we as the cities often have to do is try to convince some of our homeowners who've been in their homes for longer than 10 years to think about that as they make home improvements. Make sure you're picking the right appliances. Go more efficient.
Yeah, Terry.
No, it really comes down to just thinking about where your water is going, how you use it. Very little change in your water use actually correlates to actually pretty good savings on your bill in many cases. Well, I learned that when I first moved here by just tweaking my irrigation timer of how much I water really affects how much I pay. And it doesn't take much. You can still get the same effect, and it works even better at a larger scale when it comes to industry and business. It doesn't take much to just change how you use your water to affect how much it costs you.
Help yourself in the process, right?
That's exactly
Help your wallet.
That's exactly it.
Now, a huge topic is water security and the safety of it now and in the future. And we talk about, again, the growth of all cities represented today. Now, to close, I want to give each of you the opportunity to talk about the security of water in the next 10, 15, 20 years and how you all are working to make sure that it's there for our current residents and our future.
So ladies first, but thanks, Cindy. First of all, I want to start at that we have water, and Buckeye is sort of campaigning that we have plenty of water. Looking to the future is our goal as to how we're going to manage that water that we have. And as we talked about here, is that how can we make that amount of water that we have go further while we are building up renewable supplies that affords us a balance between groundwater as a source, but something else is the actual supply, so that we can continue to grow our economies, bring in those jobs, make Arizona an economic engine of the country. And so we're happy to be part of this, but we do that water. That's first and foremost.
Sure. So, as I mentioned, the city of Surprise recently updated its designation of assured water supply. So we have this runway that will accommodate growth and economic development. But we're not resting, right? As we look to the future, the designations are only going to get harder and harder to grow your volume to support. So we've kept that group of folks together, those experts, focused on where we're going to be in 2032. Really, thanks to our mayor and council, we've been given the resources to have our irons and all of the fires associated with growing our supplies and being a part of these projects that are going on throughout the valley. So the other part of it too is the partnerships that I know each of us have with our economic development teams internally. They're also water ambassadors that have a big part of identifying where we're going to push our water resource chips into. And it's those partnerships and that collaboration with our economic development teams, that provide us peace of mind as water providers that we are in good shape. So again, it takes a village to run a water department, and we have good villages.
For Phoenix, we're a little on the older side in this crowd. So we've been at it for over 100 years. And I think for us at this point in time, we really are doubling down on the idea of sustainable growth, right? It's not growth for growth, it's growth that is sustainable. We have a goal in Phoenix that we will become, if we are not already, the most sustainable desert city on the planet. So we don't work just in concert with Arizona cities, but we look on the more regional, national, and international levels with our participation in the C40 cities, talking with international cities about making sure growth is sustainable. And why that is so important to Phoenix is we never want to be in a situation in which we leverage the water security of our current customers, whether they're residential or commercial or industrial. We never want to leverage their water security for the sake of growth. So choosing carefully how we grow and making sure that we have more than adequate, not just adequate, more than adequate water resources available to serve that growth, to anticipate the impacts of climate change, which we are absolutely under right now, and to look at the impacts of a changing environment. Those are all things we have to take into consideration, and we take that very, very seriously.
You've heard it here, folks. We are not out of water. We come to the end of our time though today, and I thank you all for joining us, for tuning in, and for those that watch in the future. I want to encourage everyone to take advantage of the resources mentioned today. Reach out to an expert if you're not a water expert yourself. Spread the narrative that is correct, not the one that's spreading on social media. Spread the correct narrative to benefit our residents now and in the future. I thank you and hope to see you next time.